in a single quarter from what they call trading and principal investments. So what does that mean? Well, basically, when our country crashed financially a year ago, Goldman Sachs used all the taxpayer money they were given to buy up all sorts of properties and investments. And now that the economy is recovering, Goldman Sachs is getting rich on the back of the American taxpayer. Since last October, Goldman Sachs has received from the government, that's you hardworking American, thank you, presto, $10 billion from the TARP, presto, $11 billion from the Fed, poof, $30 billion from the FDIC, and yes, kazam, $13 billion from AIG. That a total of, yes, $70 billion US dollars. Pretty good, right?
A lot of money.
Yeah. Here's where the magic comes in. You can see the market sort of marching along and goes in the gutter here. You see that?
Yep.
At the point that the market goes in the gutter last fall, we give Goldman Sachs $70 billion, as we just described. Yeah? Mm-hmm. They take that money and begin acquiring assets at a time when no one else in the world has any money. Imagine, if you would, that you are on your block, and how many houses are on your block?
I don't know, say 10.
10 houses on your block. Now imagine that every house on your block collapsed in value and was suddenly only worth 10 cents on the dollar because there was a great financial panic and a great real estate panic on your block.
I have to imagine.
It happened, right? Now imagine that you went to the taxpayer and they gave you, Alex Witt, because you're Goldman Sachs, $70 billion, and you were able to go and buy every house on your block for 10 cents. Make sense? In other words, they came into this distressed asset pool using taxpayer money when every other bank had collapsed.
Bought things cheap.
Bought everything on the cheap.
Okay.
Then, and they bought it, which is fine, other than the fact they bought it with our taxpayer money with which they would have otherwise been bankrupt. In other words, Goldman Sachs doesn't exist without taxpayer help. Period.
Yeah.
But because we actually allow them to continue to exist and we supply them with all this money, they take the money and buy all these assets. Then we, by way of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and a variety of other vehicles, put 23.7 trillion US dollars underneath the entire U.S. economy. And in the process, we have reinflated the stock market, we have reinflated a variety of asset classes, except for the difference this time is Goldman Sachs now owns everything because they were the only ones with the money. It's not everything, but they own a lot more than they otherwise would have, and it's simply become worth a lot more. The tragedy here and the crime is that they never gave us an interest in that money. We gave them $70 billion, and they have all the money and all the
power. So it stayed all within Goldman Sachs. You
got it.
Well, it's a curious kind of underdog.
Was Goldman Sachs one of those 5?
I don't know, but I'd be happy to go back and check.
I'll check it. Let me tell you why I asked that. You hear a lot about the dissatisfaction, about the bonuses, etc. But underneath all of this is a conversation about the linkages and the connections of the small group of Wall Street types that are making decisions. And I just want to ask you, because you may be able to clear some of this up, it is true that Goldman Sachs receives money from AIG, is that right?
That is true.
How much was that?
I don't know exactly, but I'd be happy to make sure.
Okay, we'll find out. And also, they receive money from the TARP program, Goldman Sachs, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and Goldman Sachs is where Mr. Paulson really spent some time of his career, is that right?
Absolutely.
Your CEO that you hired to work with you is from Goldman Sachs also?
My CEO.
Well, whomever works for you. I don't want to get the nuances to the point where we misunderstand each other.
There are.
Do you have your chief of staff? Is your chief of staff from Goldman Sachs?
My chief of staff, who is a.
Just tell me. I don't have much time.
But Congresswoman, my chief of staff did spend some time.
He worked for Goldman Sachs?
Time working in the past for Goldman Sachs. That's correct.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
A lot of time in Congress talking about the $700 billion TARP bailout, which I voted against as it happens. Not a whole lot has been talked about with regard to the $2.2 trillion that the Fed has lent out. Now, I find it absolutely extraordinary that I wrote you a letter and I said, hey, who'd you lend the money to? What were the terms of those loans? How can my constituents in Vermont get some of that money? Who makes the decisions? Do you guys sit around in a room? Do you make it? Are there conflicts of interest? So my question to you is, will you tell the American people to whom you lent $2.2 trillion of their dollars, will you tell us who got that money and what the terms are of those agreements?
We explain each of our programs. In terms of the terms, we explain the terms exactly. We explain what the collateral requirements are. We explain what.
To whom did you explain that?
It's on our website.
Yeah. Okay.
So all that information is available in our commercial paper program.
And who got the money?
Hundreds and hundreds of banks. Any bank that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
You tell us who they are.
No, because the reason that is counterproductive and will destroy the value of the program is that banks will not come to the discount.
Isn't that too bad?
Sorry?
In other words, isn't that too bad? They took the money, but they don't want to be public about the fact that they received it. We heard a whole lot about AIG. They're on the front page.
I would know one thing. If Obama wanted change and change of the system, at least exposure, he could do something. But, you know, he got nearly $1 million from Goldman Sachs. So we don't expect anything from the administration. The same people, you know, whether this to me is a perfect example of my argument that I've made, and I think you generally agree with it. There's not a whole lot of difference between the two parties.
No.
You know, they're owned by the same people. You take this Goldman Sachs issue. Wouldn't it be revealing if we were able to get the transcripts and all the agreements and discussion that all Treasury and all Federal Reserve officials have had with Goldman Sachs? I mean, that would be a revelation. But, boy, they're hysterical when they think we're coming down close to saying that we might be able to open up the books. I got some information the other day that during another crisis in Central America, the banks were in trouble, and our Fed went to the IMF and told the IMF to pay the interest to the banks. I mean, that's how corrupt it is. And the whole thing is as this system continues to falter, they're not going to give up. They're going to move all these shenanigans over to the IMF. They're going to have a world organization. So the powerful elite then will have a world currency. That's what they're being planning for right now. So we as a people really have to wake up. My effort is exposing the Fed, opening up the books. The American people want it, and we have both Republicans and Democrats demanding it. But you made the right point. How are we going to get the leadership to do what the American people are demanding?
How much time do we have, Ron? How much time do we have to wake up?
That is hard to say. Timing is really tough in Austrian economics. We know what the inevitable outcome will be. But I would guess it's just a few more years. I would think the handwriting will be clearly on the wall before Obama finishes his first term, which means the next shoe is the crisis in the dollar, the value of the dollar, not just the financial system. We will see high inflation rates soon.
Congressman Ron Paul, thank you very much, sir.
The Federal Reserve Transparency Act, which has passed the House already, is something that the Federal Reserve obviously has been opposed to. And one of the reasons they are opposed to it, as I understand it, is it would politicize the monetary policy, which is not what the bill actually does. But the other reason they give is that if Congress had any subtle influence, they would inflate to more than the Federal Reserve might want to. But it's sort of ironic. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates too low too long, and the consensus now in the financial community is that is true. Interest rates are now still down at 1%, so hardly could the Congress influence the Federal Reserve in a negative way by causing them to inflate even more. When it comes to debt, the Fed is there. They can monetize the debt and keep interest rates low. The Congress can keep spending and get reelected. They don't have to raise taxes, so the Fed can act as a taxing authority. You print the money, dilute the value of the money. Prices go up, and price inflation is a tax. And when people pay a lot more for their medical care than they used to, they ought to think about the inflationary tax. Also, the Fed accommodates the Congress by liquidating debt. By debasement of the currency, the real value of the money goes down. The real debt actually goes down. It has been reported in the past that during the 1980s that the Fed actually facilitated a $5.5 billion loan to Saddam Hussein, and he then bought weapons from our military-industrial complex, and also that is when he invested in a nuclear reactor. A lot of cash was passed through, and a lot of people suppose it was passed through the Federal Reserve when there was a provisional government after 2003 invasion. It was not, that money was not appropriated by the Congress as the Constitution says. Also, there's been reports that the cash used in the Watergate scandal came through the Federal Reserve. And when investigators back in those years tried to find out, they were always stonewalled, and we couldn't get the information. But why couldn't we open the books up 10 years back and find out the truth of these matters? The $5.1 trillion didn't go to the consumers. It went to buying bad assets. It went to bailing out banks. It went to bailing out big companies. And lo and behold, the consumer didn't end up getting this. They lost their job, and they lost their houses and mortgages, and they're still in trouble. But my question is, if you took that $5.1 trillion and said that consumer spending is good, you could have given every single person in this country $17,000. You know, we hear that in the future we're going to have a better economy, and everybody hopes so, but it's hard to believe.
It seems like we have, we say deceptive, misleading information. It wasn't misleading information. We have false information that was put out to the American people, stories that were fabricated and made up.
The Fed has been a major profit center for the U.S. government. We've turned over profits, but in the last 2 years of $125 billion has spent any money. So we are not costing any money in terms of $5 trillion. We have budget deficits or anything like that. We have purchased securities. In terms of what we were trying to do, of course, the reason the Federal Reserve was founded a century ago was to try to address, as an article over the weekend by Rising from Financial Panics.
Which I look back on our past 3 years, and what Congress has done and what the Fed has done, we've literally injected about $5.3 trillion. And I don't think we got very much for it. The national debt went up $5.1 trillion. Real GDP grew less than 1%.